talking about work redefined. We've got a panel coming up, which is going to be super exciting. For those of us who are standing at the back, there are loads of seats on this side of the room. And if you are sitting at the edge of an aisle, could I just ask you to shuffle down so that other people can find a seat as we do that? But as we move into the next part of today, we're speaking work redefined. I'd love to introduce you to our incredible panel coming up. We've got Craig Vazina from Z School, who will be moderating this panel, with Geraldine Lemieux from The Refiners, Lisa Short from Mind Shifting, and Nicole Bradford, who I was lucky to hear speak yesterday, from Transformative Tech Lab. Let's give them a huge round of applause as they take the stage. Let's give them a huge round of applause as they take the stage. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. How are we doing? We got the sound going? Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. Very excited. We've talked about some of the cool conferences we've been at the past, but this venue and this conference is truly special. The topic we're talking about this morning is one that clearly interests us all, and we're going to hit at it from different perspectives. Fantastic panelists with different backgrounds, and we're going to really just dig in. So this question of work redefined, I think a lot of people, when they start thinking about that, their focus is on automation, on AI, and how technologies are going to make humans less important. But very much our focus today is on sort of the human superpowers and how we can really harness that moving forward. So Geraldine, if we can start with you, thinking about talent and thinking about these human skills that you think are especially poignant moving forward, what are some of the ideas that come to mind?
Well, actually, I think I have a very entrepreneurial perspective. Being an entrepreneur myself for the past 20 plus 5 years, I really see that talent is very important. On top of the skills, I think what is very important is what people can define in what they're doing, and it's more about creating their own jobs rather than saying, okay, this is really what I'm good at. As an entrepreneur, I think you really need to define which team you're gonna hire, know which is your skill set, but on the other side where weaknesses are, and find the best talent around you to make it happen. So for me, it's very important to create that diverse environment as an entrepreneur, and I think all jobs are going toward this, even in big corporations now.
Right. So sometimes people are calling these soft skills. Sometimes we call them transversal skills. People are using different terms for them, but there seems to be an acknowledgement that these are really the key things. And so it leads to the question of how are we actually going to, maybe Nicole, this is a good question for you. How do we then develop that? How do we measure that? How do we cultivate that within an organization or on a societal level?
Okay. So I think that the future of work skills or the transversal skills to me are very much about human interaction and the ability to connect with oneself and to connect with other people, to know oneself so that you can decide, what your positioning is, and also to connect with other people. And so fundamentally, those skills are, those fundamental skills, what I work on is technologies that help people understand themselves better so that they can connect with other people better.
Yeah. And so what do you see as the potential? You seem to be an optimist very much about how technology can assist in this way. What do you see as the greatest potential?
Well, so, one of the things that's true is the fundamental question about who am I has three components. And those three components include what you think and say, but the other one is what your body says, and then what your behavior says. And so right now, we're just at the very beginning of productization, of being able to take those signals and frame it back to you so you actually really know what your body says and what your behavior says. And so I think that's tremendously exciting because we're getting to a place where this future of work that is going to require psychological health and psychological well-being, it used to be considered a luxury, and now it's going to be a requirement, and that requirement can be supported by technology. And specifically with that too, is it for many years there was a excuse that there weren't enough resources to do this. But what these technologies provide is that we actually will have the resources to do it. And so you will sort of have your own private coach. And we need to have the dashboards that allow this to happen. But everyone will be able to get to a place where they understand themselves well enough that they can answer the question, who am I? And then when they answer the question, who am I? Then they can answer the question, what is my purpose for this period of time? Yep. And then when they have that answer, then they can understand how they fit into the wider arc of humanity.
Excellent. Maybe we'll pass it over to Lisa. So I come from the world of education. I spent 20 years working in the trenches of schools, and it's very interesting to me how this conversation mirrors what is happening in schools, this question of personalization and self-awareness. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? How do I collaborate with others? And there does seem to be a convergence of the future of learning and the future of work. And Lisa, this has been something you've been very focused on. How do we close that loop?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. I think in terms of technology, being at a technology conference, one of the things that's actually going to come out of it that's very important is actually the intersection between our human skills and our tactile skills and what we would call transversal skills. How do we educate those? How do we measure those? How do we deliver those skills on a scalable level? And never before have they been so important, because technology doesn't innovate, we do. A machine just doesn't do what it does, we actually program that. And we're now working in an entirely different framework of work. So that means we've got a completely different set of what we call the underpinning or transversal skills. And I've spent 6 years doing an international mapping of all the nations that have got a whole set of these transversal skills, and they're very common. I mean, we've got resilience, we've got creativity, we've got entrepreneurship, we've got agility, we've got fluidity. They are not things that we get in our curriculum at school. They are in fact things that teachers can't even educate or learn or teach to students. So how do we do that? Because they're the skills that are vitally important for us to be able to engage in the world that we're working in now. What does our job look like? How is it defined? When do we work? How do we work? So having those skill sets is going to be vitally important, and it is a connection and an intersection between the potentials of technology to do what we need it to do, but allow us the freedoms to still be human and to interact. And we actually now very much so need to strengthen the capacity of those skills, right down to, tactile things like learning, using books. I was at a conference recently where somebody said, well, is blockchain and AI and all the things we do going to mean that our universities are defunct? Absolutely no. But what it does mean is we can change their business models and incorporate the values that we have from that learning into our workforce. And that's some of the key things that are really different.
Yeah, so it's a cliche at this point that we measure what we value, and vice versa. But how are we going to be able to measure these very sort of nebulous things, or at least historically nebulous things?
I think it's a very interesting concept that Nicole said. So when we're talking about learning, if you like, generally learning is, a shift in knowledge, skills and attitude broadly. But how do we measure and assess the capacity of the human body to interact? Well, there are ways. This is where technology is extraordinary. So as Craig and I would know, we're working on a project at the moment using AR, VR and AI to not only deliver learning, but to assessment capture those things. So we can actually assessment capture change of tone of voice, we can get change of heart rate, we can get change of look and eye, we can get the change in just tones on our language and some of the covert behaviours that we have. We can actually use that technology to capture that. Until we can capture it, we can't measure it. So people forget that learning is not just information. Learning has to be captured, measured and have a goal. Otherwise, we don't even know that we've had a shift in those things. So it's very important. So if we're going to, that's where technology is extraordinary in that space, to be able to use AR, VR experiences to capture that. We can't do that in our normal assessment processes, but that also gives us the ability to scale the learning. And until we do that, we won't achieve it. And it's critically important.
Excellent. So in thinking about schools and I think in work, we have an opportunity to remove constraints, and a lot of the constraints have to do with in terms of people. Who are the people around us? And do you see the importance of geography moving forward? Let's throw this open to anybody. The importance of geography and what the actual dynamic of working with others looks like fundamentally changing going forward. And anyway.
Absolutely. We were having this conversation before that obviously I'm Australian, and I'm moving to the other side of the world. So my work day is a 24-hour day anywhere in the world at any time. Presenting internationally at a conference in London via Zoom on the screen in my bedroom, half dressed in my pajamas, half looking fantastic on the top half, having an intelligent conversation. That's my work day. That's my experience. I'm working with people at any one time from any continent in the world. I don't have an office. It's wherever I have internet, wherever my computer is, wherever I am, wherever my colleagues are, and wherever we engage. But what that means is what is our work? Where's our office? Where's our place in life? So it's extremely difficult, and it also means that there are some things we need to be careful of and watch, but it also means that we're shifting a generation that doesn't work like we do. So they're entrepreneurial skills in many ways, but it is also the way we work. So the world is our opportunity. We cannot say that we're a globalised economy if we're not working with the world. And technology, again, is important because that's connected us, good, bad or indifferent. The LinkedIns, the Facebooks, all our social medias, they have enabled these events. Without them, we didn't have them. And I've lived in Australia for all my life, and it really wasn't until we got technology engagement that other nations could engage.
Yeah. Please go.
So my background is in video games, and I was in video games for 14 years, and the last thing I did was operate at World of Warcraft China. And so I actually think work and learning are going to look a lot like games. And with that, what I think will happen is that the learning interfaces and the working interfaces will function very much like massively multiplayer games. And then the way that we learn human interaction skills, I call it a pearl necklace, where you have a very talented human whose ability to teach, to emote, like Lior, who was here earlier, like what a talented human. So it's like a pearl necklace where you have these talented humans connected by a string of technology while you move from one experience with a talented human through a technology-enabled platform to another experience with a talented human. Yeah. And that will be how we learn. And for that, we don't have to have advanced general intelligence for that. Mm-hmm. We don't have to have her or, something like that. For that, we could do that now with the talented humans and the technology that we have today. It's called a quest line.
Yeah. Go.
And I would like to add on that topic that from a startup perspective, that means that from the get-go, you set up the values of the company. You understand that culturally, you will have people in the company that, I've been doing all my work in cross-border. So being in the US and being a US citizen now and French also, I really see that it's very important to embrace those values and to find a common ground for everyone working in your companies. That also means putting in place all hands meetings so that everyone gets the same level of information and you can get all the team involved and people on the same pace. And I think it's very important. You have to start that from the beginning, because when you have like 20, 25 people in the company, and if you didn't start that with 3 or 4 people, for instance, then it's super complicated to put
yep.
in place.
Absolutely. So I'm looking around the audience. It seems to be on the younger side. Many of you clearly have learned a lot of these things at some point that has made you entrepreneurial or that has helped you become adept at some of these things. But a clear challenge that I'm interested in is in the French school system, for example. This is not, what it looks like. And the same is true in most American schools, and I'm sure in Australia or whatever. So how do we bridge that gap for preparing people for the world of work, right? When the world of school right now is so dramatically different.
I think that's an important point, Craig, because the education system that we're working with concurrently at the moment is traditionally very resistive. I worked in the education world for many years as well. So we have to work with the systems that we've got now. So we know that the learning curve that we have to deliver the skill sets and the type of learning for the generations that we have now are going to happen concurrently with what we existingly have. We're not going to replace it. It has to run concurrently because we need to do it now. I mean, do we have those abilities? Absolutely we do. Just by way of example, because sometimes we need to give tangible examples. We talk about diversity and inclusion. How can we use technologies to truly translate a scalable education program in that way? We're partners with a gallery exhibition, if you like, called 200 Women. We've taken this exhibition and we're using that and it's tactile. It's a book, it's also digital. So it's in a variety of different mediums to meet the needs of a whole range of individuals, including those that are currently in the school systems that we have now. Using that as an inspiration, and then we're using technologies such as immersive storytelling, capturing it on AR, VR, digital recordings, to be able to share that information in a scalable way and truly capture and build in diversity and inclusion in businesses, in schools, cross-border, interculturally, etc. So, we're looking at working with nations at the moment with, at the same time, Africa, Australia, UK, EU, US, all at the one time. We're using a traditional methodology, really, in many ways, but we're using technology to empower that process. So I think in terms of we need to act now. There's far too much talk happening and not actually anybody delivering solutions right now. So, there is solutions available. We need to assist the schooling system. We need to assist universities and workplaces to engage and truly capture the opportunity. And we were talking before, I would class myself as chronically unemployable. And I would say that nearly everybody in this room, because who's here's entrepreneurial? Most of us here are. Can any of you think of anything worse than going in a 9-to-5 job where you have to be there at 9 o'clock? We could not work in that environment. But how do we translate our skills and the value sets that we've got to the school leavers that are leaving that have just been educated for the best part of the 17 years in that 9-to-5 mentality? So we've got to work very hard and very quickly to deliver these skill sets and the values of what we've got here that are really important.
So one of the big themes, I think, also in terms of what is good business these days is what is doing good, right? And so this question of social impact and a sense of purpose is very important for most talented people. And how do we bake that into the cultures that we're building in our companies and our startups? Any thoughts on this question of doing well and doing good?
Well, one of the things that has me really excited about entrepreneurs, and I work with a lot of them for my work, we're looking for people who are building, entrepreneurs and innovators who are building technology to support mental health, emotional well-being, human thriving, psychological health. And so purpose is a key part of the definition of something called flourishing, which is the apex of health, is when you truly, truly flourish. And so I think that entrepreneurial communities and entrepreneurial companies, I actually think that they're the prototype of what work will look like. And so that's why I think it's so important that you guys do what you're doing, because I think the process of figuring out the future of work within the startup communities is actually I actually think it's a form of impact, because we have to understand what, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit jet lagged. We have to have a prototype of what it is we're doing and how it all ties together. So that's just one point. I actually think that what you're doing, whatever it is, and also the way that you think specifically about diversity and some of the things you've said, I think that itself is impact. The other thing too is that younger people who are coming into the workplace, whether it's entrepreneurial or corporations, if you look at the global sentiments of what is important to them and what matters, there's definitely a thread of wanting to have an impact on the world, and deeply understanding like what is it that I value. And so what's exciting is this definition of flourishing for health and work, the things that entrepreneurial communities do, and then what young people and young at heart people, like I'm a perennial, new every year.
I like that.
It's all becoming impact, and that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, because I think the most important now is the why rather than the what. So we all know why we work. I mean, it's obvious, but we need to go beyond that, and that's exactly what you say. It's like flourishing, and I mean extend people to this vision, and why you get up every morning is and the what is your job every day, and the product and the service you're developing if you are a startup. But it's very, very important to to be on a mission and to get that vision, or where you foresee your company in 10 years, what you want to achieve with it, and that might not be with that company you are developing right now, and your job will be also to maybe create 1, 2, 3 companies over the 10 or 15 coming years. So I think it's really, really important to have this kind of vision.
Yep, absolutely.
I think there's a key element too to our future of work and redefining it, and it's definitely got to be relationships. So I often use the term hyper-collaborative. I do a lot of work in the blockchain space, and one of the things that I've really recognised in the technology, and certainly in the blockchain world, is the need to have really strong relationships. Now, one of the value sets that goes with that is a relationship is a relationship. In a work life and a private life, the same sets of values we have in our private life are the ones that we bring into our work life. Respectful relationships, how we engage, how we communicate, the value set, what we give, what we get, those sorts of things. So I think the future of work and redefining work is definitely about engagement and relationships. Because if I asked you all the questions, one of the main reasons we attend these events is, yes, to conduct business and possibly to get capital and those sorts of things, but 99% of it's here about relationships. We will all leave here with more relationships than we had when we came. And I think that's something that's got to be truly important about redefining work, because it is the relationships and how we engage with other businesses that will achieve tasks that we need them to do, and how we value and respect those moving forward, and how we potentially can damage those moving forward as well. It was interesting, we went, the speakers got taken to learn how to waltz, the Viennese waltz, on Wednesday, and the professor who was teaching us has written a book on business etiquette. And I took his card. I was just so excited because I'm putting together a business impact summit in the UK later in the year, and it's a very high level summit, and I want him there because relationships are truly valuable, and there is a certain etiquette that I think is important that technology doesn't give us. So that, it is that real connection between what's its value and how can we hold back, and what's the human values that we have to retain that are important.
Yep. Absolutely. I know we have an opportunity to take some questions from the audience, so feel free if you would like to type in a question to Slido. But just in terms of what is possible bringing technology into the equation. We've talked about training through VR and immersive learning. We've talked about AI as a way to kind of track on a macro level people's behavior in what has in the past been very fuzzy and unable to kind of have objective data on. Are there other ways that you see technology fundamentally changing the way that we learn and interact in a work environment? Anybody?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I'll say is it's some of the dangers that we have. So because we work such different hours, and we were saying before, my work day when I'm in Australia starts at 8 at night and finishes at 4 or 5 in the morning, because 99% of the time I'm working with the UK or the EU. But one of the things the challenges, the things that I've found in my work environment is the need for instantaneous responses. So the way we use technology now, using email, messaging, text, WhatsApp, and so forth, we send a message, we automatically assume the person on the other end is in the frame of mind, is not fatigued, all those sort of things, and will instantly respond. Now, there's a difference between responding and reacting. So I think there's some things that we need to look at in terms of what those dimensions are. That, if we go back a few years ago, if we received a letter, we had a time to respond, which means we use different language sets. We have different tones in our voices, which means we don't create conflict. People get really annoyed when you say no and you don't give an explanation, but they want an answer straight away and you can't type because you're on the plane or you're on the phone, wherever you are. So they're the sorts of things that we need to be mindful of, and when we're talking and using those engagement tools, that we need to remember the human element of it. So next time you do get a message, just think, well, that person hasn't responded. I'd prefer to get a good response rather than a reaction. So I think there's some of the things that we need to be cautious of, but certainly embrace at the same time.
So I'm all over it, right? Some of the things that I'm really interested in is ways that we can use technology to deeply connect with ourselves and connect with other people. So one example, one test that we're going to do is haptics are pretty amazing. Your brain takes in information and makes sense of it. And so a very, explicit example is that blind people can see enough to navigate a room, and deaf people can hear if the view of the room and the sounds are tapped onto their skin. And so on teams, whether they're distributed or together, there's a storming, norming, forming process. I think that we can use biosignals, your biodata, which reflects your psychological state. I think we can use a mix of biosignals in order to accelerate the storming, norming, forming process, and we're going to start testing that at Stanford later this year. There's some fun things that are a little bit invasive but interesting. Like there's a product called Empath, which is taking it's listening to the words in a meeting, and when it starts to get aggressive, or when it starts to get covert, the lighting in the room, because it's been connected to a hue system, starts to change. And you might think, well, why do I need lighting to show that this person is being aggro against me? Well, if you think about what goes wrong and sideways on teams, is that often that is happening and we don't talk about it. Like we pretend it didn't happen, and then that's what goes to rot inside an organization, large or small. Or things like if there was another study that was done at Stanford that had a little robot on the table and during ideation. And if the robot periodically piped up and said, oops, I made a mistake, then the net number of ideas that the humans generated was actually more than when it was silent. And so this is still very early, but these are examples of how we can, use technology to help humans be more human with one another. So it's not about replacing our senses or having us interface slowly with a bot. Only with a bot. It's really about how do we establish a level of individual and group understanding so that when we're together in our very human sense, we actually get to make the most of that experience and have the best outcomes from it.
Yeah. There's a great question here from the audience with 3 upvotes. innovation in tech is great, but we're seeing more and more burnouts at work. How do we train people to remain emotionally stable if helping tech is not available? So this question of self-care and avoiding burnout is key. So
Yeah, top three things to do. One, sleep train. So really learn how to sleep. Sleep has one of the biggest effects on your psychological well-being. It also changes how much negativity you notice. And this is proven. It changes your hormone levels. So really, it's like take your sleep very, very seriously. And if you sleep well for 10 days, it's like your life is different. So number one, sleep. Also, if you drink 3 hours before you go to sleep, you don't sleep as deeply. So think about that. Another thing is meditate. Get a meditation practice. It's the easiest thing. You can do it without technology. It's fundamentally one of the most important things that you can do because it's the beginning of deeply connecting to one itself and understanding that just because you have an angry thought, it doesn't make you an angry person, and starting to have that distance. And then the last thing is to understand that you're on the hero's journey. So how you think about stress has a big impact on its physiological effect on you. And so, I love what you said about people going from, they might have 3 or 4 startups and what happens in the startup, because I think the startup founder is actually on the hero's journey. And if you are simultaneously meditating or doing things that allow the rejection and the hardship to actually deconstruct your ego, then you can make building a startup one of the most spiritual things that you can do. And so those 3 things.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and this is from a personal, individual and personal point of view. I think we as entrepreneurs or companies, we have a responsibility in it too. And it's for me, it's very important to set up the expectation. I think communication is key. You need to talk with people. You need to talk with your team. You need to have like those candid conversations without, of course, you set boundaries, but it's not like you're having a conversation with your friends when you're having a conversation with your teammates. But I think it's very important that we can have this openness in this discussion. And that goes back, for me, it goes back to the value and the culture of the company. So if people works with you, understand which values you are running in the company, what culture you want to extend, then it's much easier for them also either to cultivate these personal things and also to share any moment where they feel like, wow, I'm of the age and I really need to have a conversation.
I sort of like to bring things down to a really practical and tangible purpose, and I think that I like to think that if you can't measure something, you can't do something about it either. So I like to think in terms of a preventative way, and I'll just use it as an example. A number of years ago, I was engaged in an external study program. I was heading into study medicine, and most of the people and the individuals in this program were studying very late at night. So the university involved decided that they needed to proactively look after the mental health and the well-being of the participants. And there was a reason for it. They wanted them to engage and to complete their studies, and they wanted them to have, sustainable lives. So the minute we used to log on, there was just a tag ball. It was one word. You're only given an opportunity. You couldn't get past it. Everybody had to do it. So how was your day? I can't remember the exact question, but something like, how was your day? You gave one word. The words that we gave and the tone that you gave meant that it actually caused in behind the scenes an interactive process. So if you said stressed, for example, a physical team that sat in behind it would look at it and say, stress, what are they stressed about? They would look at, for example, were they late with their assessments? Were they late with their assignments? Were there any, issues that were involved? And they proactively got involved with the individual at a personal level. It was just a tag ball, that's all it was, something as simple as putting a word in. So I think there's 2 key parts, exactly what you said, in the sense that we need to have some open conversations. Entrepreneurs are always really good at being happy and bright and bubbly, and this is fantastic and wonderful. But knowing we sit in behind it, we have some really stressful days where we think, God, I don't want to get out of bed today because I just don't know how I'm going to get through today. So I think open and honest conversation is really, really important. And at these events where we truly can engage with other entrepreneurs who've experienced those things, because until we say it, we can't do anything about it, till we acknowledge acknowledge it, we can't do anything about it. When we're stressed financially because we can't get capital and we're thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get through, I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills, those sorts of things. I think that there's an element we have to have open and honest conversation, because until we can say it and do it and measure it, we can't do anything about it. And we can engage with technology to do that and do it proactively. It's just no different than going and having a test for, cancer or whatever. We have to test our mental health and measure it so we can do something about it. So I think that's really important.
Fantastic. That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give another round of applause for our panel.